Everyone in their seats diligently waiting for this last segment, and everyone with their coffees. May I request you to please come and let the agenda roll. Our delegates at the coffee stand, last call to take your seats. All right. Welcome to the last segment of day 2 of the AVPN annual conference that we are now calling A Lot Can Happen Between Coffee and Cocktails. So the next 2 segments that I am to introduce to you, first I introduce myself. I'm Lavanya Jairam, Executive Director for AVPN South Asia. I'm happy to bring to you the next session if you are ready to hear about how collaborative philanthropy is crucial in Asia to bridge the gender gap and accelerate towards achieving the SDGs, and about how compelling a force the Asia Gender Equality Pool Fund could be to improve outcomes for women and girls across the region. May I invite on stage our 3 powerful change makers to talk us through this very pertinent gender narrative. Calling on stage our all-women panel of Naina Sabarwal Batra, our Chief Executive Officer, AVPN. Yes, please, a round of applause. Next up, Shinta Vijaja Kamdani, Chief Executive Officer, Sintesa Group. Next up, Alex Peterson Zwane, Chief Executive Officer, Global Innovation Fund. Over to you, Naina, and our esteemed panelists.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah. So how's it going? How is day 2? Great, good. It's going to get even better because we're talking about a topic that's really close to mine and Shinta and Alex's heart, which is gender, and how do we drive more capital towards it? How do we drive more attention towards it? I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that it's going to take 163 years at the current levels to close the gender gap. In fact, the Asia Gender Network, which has been powered by AVPN, has actually set up as their password for every, and I'm letting this out in public, for any of their data is less than 100, because we want to keep reminding ourselves that we need to reduce this gap to less than 100 years. Asia contains 60% of the world's population. We have said this again and again and again. And none of the issues that face the world will actually get solved unless we here solve these issues, whether it be climate change or whether it be gender. And if you talk about gender, it's the one sort of SDG, if you look at Goal 5, it's the one SDG that actually disproportionately affects every other SDG being achieved. So unless and until we have equity, parity, equality for gender, we're not going to be able to achieve any of the other 16 SDGs. So really, really important. The Asia Gender Network was launched a year ago during the pandemic, and the founding members have come together with a mission to mobilize capital to improve outcomes for women and girls in Asia. This network is the first network of its kind because it brings women from across several different Asian countries to come together as champions, as role models, and really stand up for women and girls in their own communities, and also prove or provide examples, success stories, challenges for others in other countries across Asia. This fabulous platform met earlier this week, actually day before yesterday, for the very first time since they were formed. And as Pat Matthias, please stand up, Pat, who's leading our gender efforts, said it was the first time they actually saw anybody chest down. Till then, it was all chest up. So very, very interesting. We believe that capital accelerates change, and the members of the Asia Gender Network are committed to this vision over the long run. And they have decided to collaborate with each other, learn from one another, and hold each other accountable. This morning, we started the day with an amazing performance, right? How many of you were here to see that performance? Those of you who weren't, you really missed out on something. I mean, seriously. But when we talked about that performance, we talked about superheroes. And I'm incredibly proud to present a superhero on this panel today. The wonderful lady sitting on my left, Shinta Kamdani, is a superhero. She's a superwoman. If I start to tell you all the different things that she's involved with, I will be here till after cocktails. And since our MC has said this is between coffee and cocktails, I am not going to do that. I am going to let Shinta just say a few words to introduce herself. Shinta, over to you.
Thank you, Naina, and it's a really great pleasure to be here. Although, you know, usually after lunch, people tend to be sleepy. So I think we have to wake people up here. But maybe I should start introducing myself as I'm a wife, a mother of 4, which I'm very proud of. And I think my day job is I run a family business, which has been in Indonesia for over 100 years. So I'm a 3rd generation, but what Syntesa is today is very different than when my grandfather started in 1919. But I'm proud to be continuing the legacy of a family business. And people always ask me, you know, you're running this family business, how come you have time for everything else? And I said, you know, this is why, because you live in Indonesia. You know, I think this is a land where you can do everything and anything you want. And besides running my day job, I'm also the coordinating vice chairwoman of the Indonesian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, in which I have been involved for over 20 years.
Wow.
So I was one of the, I think when I started, there was almost no women. And especially for me, it was quite tough being accepted in that particular community, but here I am. And besides that, I'm also very much involved in both sustainable development and you know, climate change, environment, as well as also in the women sphere. And this is something, when we talk about women, we talk about gender equality. This is something that's very close to my heart. So I always believe that in Indonesia, you know, I always wish that there's definitely, when you look at all the female, I mean, 270 million people, almost more than half are women right now, almost equal. And, you know, you see them, you want to bring them. When we talk about equality, what does equality really means, you know? I want to make sure that those women can be treated the same, you know, have the equal opportunity. When they go to the bank, they can get that, you know, financing the same way that their husband can, you know? And I think there are many ways when we look at the women, how women grow and develop in Indonesia. Definitely, this is where we are, me and all my female Indonesian friends as well, and I'm sure in Asia and many other countries the same. We want to show that we, the women power, and we can definitely make the difference. And I think that's where I get involved more and more. I started organization on Indonesian Business Coalition on Women Empowerment, supported by many of my friends, and also companies that really want to promote this. On the other side, also working with women on developing their entrepreneurship. And we want, our target is we want to develop more women, not just on an informal sector, but bringing them to the formal sector. So that's kind of my background, what I'm doing outside of my day job. And also, I think now capturing on the sustainable development goals, I think Indonesia definitely wants to show ahead. And I think we are putting number 5 as a big priority as well. So that, and I think with that, I want to say that I'm happy to be here and to discuss, all and share. I mean, I want to get out of this room with some sort of, how do you call it? call to action.
Absolutely.
Definitely. I don't want to get out of this room and people just say, oh, just I'm listening to this woman talking, right? There has to be something getting out of this room. And I think that's what we need, the three of us needs to achieve when we finish this session.
That is true. A big round of applause for Shinta. No pressure. We need to come out with a call to action, people. So just remember that. Superwoman to my right, superwoman to my left. I met Alex for the first time before the pandemic. I think it was 2018. She was just coming on her way to Indonesia, if it was to be the case, where the Global Innovation Fund was looking to make a few investments, and look where she's taken it. It was one of the first big pooled funds in the world, and I'm going to hand it over to Alex to talk a little bit about herself and what she does and why this excites her.
Well, thank you so much for that nice introduction, and it's a great story to hear about what's possible to achieve when you put your mind to it. I'm just thrilled to be here at AVPN, where you see this amazing confluence of innovators and grant makers and influencers come together to talk about the potential for innovation in this region. And I know it's a busy day, and I do hope we can satisfy this call to action that we're all looking for. I think what we're here to talk about today is the role that innovation plays, and we'll get to the role that pooled funds play in advancing innovation, but particularly for gender equality. And my notes say here to talk about the idea of agency for women and girls, but there's an even stronger word, which is power, and power for women and girls, and what that really means to seize that, to advance that SDG number 5, and then all the ripple effects that has for poverty reduction and for economic growth. As you launch the Gender Equality Pooled Fund, I hope that we can share some lessons from the Global Innovation Fund and our Innovating for Gender Equality work. Like this new fund that I'm so thrilled to hear about today, the Global Innovation Fund, or GIF for short, is a multilateral initiative aimed at accelerating evidence-based innovation to improve the lives of the world's poorest people. The gender component of what we do really came to life starting in 2018, so a very auspicious year, when we partnered with Global Affairs Canada to launch our Innovating for Gender Equality Fund, to invest to find scalable innovations that increase the agency and improve the livelihoods of women and girls. For example, to give you a sense of the kind of thing that we do, in 2020, we awarded a grant to an organization called Breakthrough. Breakthrough does a school-based program for adolescent girls and boys in grades 6 to 8, aiming at changing gender attitudes, aspirations, and behaviors. This is a nonprofit organization, but they use public schools, government schools, as their platform through which to spread this and scale this innovation. The results of randomized controlled trials show that Breakthrough can really deliver on what they promise. After their program is implemented, you see a 50% increase in the number of people, young people, who advocate for college education for girls, a 33% increase in the number of people who support a fair division of household duties between women and men, and a 25% increase in households reporting that financial responsibilities should be shared by women as well. This is the kind of innovation that contributes not just to improvements in lives right now, but the potential for deep structural change. I think that's what you have the opportunity to do as well. When we get to our next section, I hope we can talk about what I think are a couple of key pieces of governance and around the use of evidence that can really help deliver on the potential of this fund.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being the perfect segue into what I want to talk about next, which is why do we need pooled funds and how do they help in innovation? So AVPN actually launched its first pooled fund in 2021 when we were right in the middle of the pandemic. And the reason we launched the pooled fund at that point was because some of our members couldn't travel to find beneficiary organizations, they couldn't travel to do due diligence, but they were sitting in their homes really worried about what the pandemic was doing to marginalized communities all over Asia. And we launched our first pooled fund on last mile healthcare delivery to actually reach just these very types of organizations. And as Alex said very, very eloquently, pool funds lead to trust-based philanthropy, they lead to supporting innovation, and we were really, really proud of the fact that we were going to use these funds to actually help build organizational capacity. You know, we all want to direct systems change, we want to transform the economies and the communities that we live in. And as Shinta said, we want to make sure that there is equality, that women everywhere, girls everywhere feel that they can ask for their rights. They feel that they are seen and they feel that they are recognized. But we can't do that unless the organizations that can help support them are strong. And they are led by strong leaders. And that is why AVPN gave organizational grants. And I want to actually introduce some very special people here who were the recipients of our first pooled fund. And I'm just incredibly blown away by them and by their stories. And I feel very, very honored that they took a grant from us. So I want to introduce Dia. Dia, are you here? Dia is here is the CEO for CHISD, or the Center for Indonesia's Strategic Development Initiatives. Dia, do you have a mic? Perfect. Tell us a little bit.
Thank you, Naina, and congratulations on the Gender Network. I managed to sneak into the session yesterday, and congratulations. CHISD's focus is on public health intervention, health system strengthening, and specifically on primary healthcare transformation. Within it, we work with community health workers who are primarily women without enough formal education. The unrestricted funding we received enable us to do the required innovation to enhance the capacity of these community health workers so they are empowered to carry out their task, which is also creating impact to the communities they serve. At the height of the pandemic, 3,654 women community health workers successfully reached out to 780,000 people within a period of 6 months. Thank you again.
Wow, that is amazing. And you know, CHISD is doing some amazing work. So if you want to know more about what they're doing, please see Dia after this session. You know, she's amazing. I also want to call on Emily. Emily is the Country Director, Philippines Program of the International Institute of Rural Reconstruction. Hi, Emily.
Hi, good afternoon to everyone. I provide leadership and strategic directions to our operations in the Philippines. And for more than 60 years, we have worked with communities, local governments, and other stakeholders to develop innovative yet practical solutions to rural poverty. And as a health advocate, I am so glad that we were able to access the AVPN Health Pooled Fund because it allowed us to intensify our work on COVID response. With the AVPN Fund, we are currently implementing the Community Managed Disaster Risk Reduction plus Health that will enable us better access to effective and efficient primary healthcare services at the local level, most especially for women, children, and the poorest of the poor. So thank you very much, AVPN.
Thank you, Emily. And again, Emily will be here after we finish, so please do reach out to her. So we did the Last Mile Healthcare Fund, which was our first fund. We followed that up with 4 more, and my team loved me for it, because every time somebody wanted to do a fund, I was like, yay, let's do this. So we did one on, we launched one on maternal, child, nutrition, and infant health. I'm saying it all wrong. We are also launching one on STEM education for women and girls, and how do we get more women and girls into STEM jobs. We are doing a second version of the healthcare fund. We did one on COVID relief and recovery. We did one on digitalization of nonprofits. We are now launching our gender equality fund. And that's really exciting because it is our largest fund in terms of size. It is a $25 million fund spread over 5 years. It covers the largest geographic area for us, literally in every country that AVPN is present in. And it is looking to increase the economic empowerment for women and girls in these communities. I'm really, really excited that we are partnering with G20 and with B20, which my superwoman friend Shinta leads, to actually have a focus this year with its priorities focusing on global health architecture, digital transformation, and sustainable energy transformation. Shinta, as she said, is underlying it all with a gender lens, with goal 5 as a priority. So as chair of B20 Indonesia, Shinta, can you tell us how collaboration is key to amplifying impact, and how do you plan to launch the Gender Equality Pooled Fund?
Yes. Thank you, Naina. So when I was asked to chair the B20, I think one aspect that is very, very important. I mean, in the B20 is the business, by the way, for you who doesn't know, B20 is the business engagement group of the G20. So we have all global business leaders participating in the B20. And by the way, out of now, we have almost 1,400 in our community, 37% are women. So this is the highest ever in ever B20. So I'm very proud to say participation.
Round of applause, guys.
And the common, of course, the 3 aspects that you were saying, we are focusing on digital transformation, global health, and energy transition. But we have to understand that, of course, the women and gender plays a very big part on the whole task forces. We have 6 task forces, and the women, we call it Action Council. And what it is the B20 is supposed to come out with policy recommendations to our government, to the G20 that will be included in the communique of the government. But this year, our presidency, Indonesia as host, our president is very clear. He wants some actionable and concrete result. He wants legacy project that we can put forward. So it's not just about talking policies, but what is concretely the legacy that we can leave behind. So this is why when we talk about the women in Business Action Council, we were looking into a number of areas. First of all, in the policy side, we are talking about, obviously, digital. I mean, digital is a very big aspect on the policy. We want to be able to support women on the digitalization aspect, providing the right infrastructure for women. We are talking about gender equality in the workplace. We talk about leadership. But we also would like to see for the development of women MSME and entrepreneurs, we need financing access is a very big part. And this is why we come out and we launch what we call we haven't launched, but this is our legacy. It's what we call the One Global Women Empowerment Platform. So what is it? What is that in this platform, as you know, right now, government, private sectors, NGO, business, they all work on silo. There is no such platform where you kind of combine. And this is where the word collaboration comes in, because we want to connect everyone, right? So it has 5 aspects. So first is when we talk about accelerating on the digitalization aspect, we were talking also about how we can provide more capacity for these women MSME as well, in which we are providing best practices and knowledge sharing on what's happening around the world. The third aspect, it's the funding side. Definitely a lot of the work cannot be done without having the funding. right? And this is including all the women SME, startups, they have difficulty in the financial access. And we want to set up specifically this fund to also look into how we can support more women SMEs. The fourth aspect is obviously the networking side. You want to combine and match this MSME women to obviously institutions, to corporations, to many of the work that actually many companies are actually doing as well. So the last one is the regulation. A lot of countries does not realize that how the regulatory framework plays a very, very important role in mobilizing all this. So unless we are talking in terms of what's happening, how the ecosystem can be built and the regulation can be there, it's going to be very, all we are talking is nothing, right? So this is why the platform, this is going to be a permanent platform. Right now we have already interested international organization that want to adopt the platform, because we need a permanent secretariat in the platform, in which it will continue throughout the B20. So this year is the Indonesia, next year will be India, the following year will be Brazil. We want this to continue on. And we are already looking and curating at a lot of projects that are combined and work on. And this is something that definitely the pool fund that you mentioned from AVPN can come in to this whole picture. Because at the end of the day, what we want is we want to crowdsource, to share success policies and promote ideas, programs, and partnership. We want to also crowdfund, to collaborate, to invest in the empowerment of women entrepreneurs and women in the workforce. Also curating to provide a reference or guideline for training programs and resources to develop capabilities. We want to clarify, to support women in understanding regulation, laws, and requirements to scale up their businesses. And finally, to communicate, to update, inform, and report to the OJV community and the general public on their initiatives and achievements. So these are the 5C also that will support the whole platform, and we hope that the pool fund that we are now calling for action with AVPN can be integrated into this and will make this run.
Absolutely, and I can see very, very clear reasons for partnership with this platform, because like you, I think we cannot work in silos. We need to break the silos. We need to connect all of these different pieces together if we are going to see impact being realized. And the pool funds is a great way of actually putting funds to work. And that is why I'm going to now turn to Alex, because with the Global Innovation Fund, you have had a lot of experience in actually structuring these pool funds, in really seeing how they work, in also telling us where they don't work. So I'd love to get some input from you, because we are pretty new in this and you have had a lot of experience. So what learnings can you share with us?
Well, thank you very much for that. And, hopefully, yes, you can benefit from some of the lessons learned from GIF. And let me congratulate you again on the launch of this new fund. First of all, I guess the first and most important thing is to take on a really important challenge. And you've clearly ticked that box. We've heard about the need for entrepreneurship and the access to capital, digitization, to unlock the potential of women in the labor force. Right now, UNDP figures show that female labor force participation of 60% or below in 2/3 of the countries where data is actually collected. It's particularly low in India, which I'm sure will be one of the very focused countries for your fund. So you've chosen a timely and important problem, and that's job one to do. A couple of very practical things that I think that you get when you pool capital together in a pooled fund like this. The first is, it helps you to manage risk. For all of your donors individually, when you're investing, only a portion of their capital is going to be exposed to any particular deal that you do. And why is this important? I guess it's because one of the things I'm going to really urge you to do, and I think we're like-minded about this, is to invest in innovation. And innovation is what we're going to need if we're going to bounce back from the devastation of the global pandemic. We lost something like 25 years of progress in lifting people out of poverty. we cannot take 25 years to get that back, which means innovation is going to be at the core of what you're doing, which means you're going to have to accept smart risks, and so you're going to need to mitigate that. One of the things we've talked about there then is pooling capital together. And the second thing I would say is think very carefully about how you make investment decisions so that your donors are appropriately informed, but also arm's length, and that decision making is with a sort of professionalized investment committee or of some sort, if you will. I think that's really important to help you have the right capacity to take on risk and to be held accountable then for impact. I'll just close by saying innovation really pays. Innovation and international development pays. If you go on the GIF website, you can see that we've recently published a paper that shows that just 6 of our early investments have generated $2.7 in net social value for every dollar invested by GIF. That's a social rate of return of something like 24%. So this is important, and this is what we can all, do together. And I look forward to sharing pipeline and sharing challenges and lessons learned with you as you advance this new fund to its next steps.
Thank you, Alex. And I hope, ladies and gentlemen, what you see here is really quite inspirational. All 3 of us are talking about collaboration, are talking about sharing, are talking about opening up our learnings, opening up our platform, and doing things together. If we really are to, actually maximize impact, if we don't do it together, we're not going to get there. None of us is competing with each other. We need to have many more of us here if we are going to be able to reach where we need to go, if we're going to be able to wipe out 25 years of going back in less than 25 years. So what I want to talk about next is actually what do the kinds of organizations need that we hope to reach with the platform that Shinta is talking about, with the innovation that Alex is talking about. So I'm going to call on a couple of organizations to tell us themselves rather than us telling you what they need. So Liberty Society, are you here, Tamara? Hi, Tamara.
Hello. Sorry.
So tell us, what do you do and what do you find as the significance of funding that the kind that you will get from pooled funds like us or from the crowdsourced funding that Shinta is talking about? How will that actually help you?
For sure. So Liberty Society, we sell and manufacture B2B eco-friendly goods and gifts. So we partner with corporates and brands to make their shopping, gifting, merchandising more sustainable. Through our training to employment model, we increase income of women through selling products. Unrestricted funding can seem like it's reckless and it doesn't make sense. But let me tell a story from one of our makers and how I thought about that too. So one of our maker, refugee women, so when we increased the level of income for her, and then she bought herself a motorcycle rather than going towards children education. And I was wondering why, right? Because we want the money to come into education. But then upon asking her, she said, no, motorcycle represents freedom for her. And for us, as an organization, unrestricted funding gives us freedom and flexibility to run even faster. As a social enterprise, we need to focus both on supply and demand, as you all know. So if a donor is asking us to only focus on go towards your training program, it stifles our economic growth that ends up us, for example, hiring more marketing people, investing in marketing campaigns. So those investing in those as well, it goes hand in hand. So those growth levers, I'm saying, are very important both to be funded as a social enterprise. Thank you.
Thank you. And let's hear from Generation Thailand. Bin, are you here?
I am here. Hi. So for Generation, 54% of our graduates are actually women, and we're pushing to put more women into tech in countries like Australia, Singapore, Hong Kong, and also in Thailand. The intervention that we need to happen is not only on the learner side. Of course, women need to be more aware there are opportunities out there that's suitable for them, but at the same time, on the employer side, they need to also be more open to actually accept the women. And that's not necessarily about lowering the bar. It is more about designing more accommodating environment to accept more women into the tech world. So to have unrestricted funding for us, that would allow us to do more of a thought leadership type of research so that we understand the situation better, so that we come up with a better innovation that answers to the problem.
Thank you. Can we have a round of applause for her? So both my panelists said, you know, we need a call to action. And I really think it's really important that all of us here take a commitment to really actually say that we're going to put money where our mouth is. We're going to either do crowdfunding, or we're going to set up a platform, or we're going to support innovation in what we do. I mean, you know, we come to these events, conferences like this one, although nothing really beats AVPN, you know, and we get really filled with energy. We meet people who are doing amazing things like PIN, like Tamara. We hear from CHISD, we hear from other organizations. We meet co-funders, and we are like blown away by, you know, the kind of innovation that they're doing, and then we go back to our day jobs. So I think it's really important that before you leave this conference and you leave the island of the gods, as Bali is known, you actually decide what is the one thing that you're going to do, and you do it next week. Not next month, not next year, but you actually put in place an action plan. And we've already started doing that with our gender fund. We are in partnership with Shinta. We are very clear. We want to announce it at the G20 together as part of B20. So we are really excited to have other participants coming into our gender pooled fund. I am thrilled to tell you that besides two very large, sizable contributions, we also have contributions from Myanmar, from Malaysia, and from Indonesia. So, you know, very, very excited to say that this is going to be a multi-representational fund. It's going to be a fund that, you know, all of us are proud to be part of. And I'm going to call on Rob, if he's here, to tell us why he's supporting the Gender Pool Fund. Rob, are you here? I hope you're here. No Rob. Oops, that's scary. Well, when Rob comes in, he will tell you why he's supporting the pool fund. But Rob Rosen is the head of philanthropy partnerships for the Gates Foundation, and they have just committed to supporting the Gender Pool Fund. So a big round of applause in absentia for them. It's exciting, and we're thrilled to talk about gender. Really, really important. AVPN, just so that all of you know, is 76% women. That doesn't mean we're not into gender parity. We definitely believe that this is a journey you do with both men and with women. We hope you will work towards all the SDGs, but remember, Goal 5 does underpin a whole lot. I am going to ask both my panelists for quick closing remarks. Shinta has a flight to catch, and I promised that I will not let her miss her flight. So Alex, you go first.
Well, thank you very much. I think what I'll close on is saying that in addition to my call for action around innovation and smart risk-taking, I also think there's the opportunity to really double down on rigorous evidence of impact. We heard from these entrepreneurs here that they need core funding, that projectized funding artificially constrains their ability to deliver on impact. I think I would put on the table in front of us that part of what makes that freedom possible and appropriate is understanding what that impact really is. And so to take the time as part of our collective investment in innovation and philanthropy to put money aside for actually measuring impact and then sharing what we learn about what works. There's some material on the GIF website about how we think about using a gender marker and particularly measuring impacts around gender that we've developed and that we've found incredibly useful in helping us to think about not only gender equality as a means to an end, but as an end to itself that we can report on more credibly. And I hope that there's opportunities to continue the conversation, not just with AVPN about this, but with all of my colleagues who are thinking about investing for innovation here in this room. Onward.
Thank you, Alex. Shinta.
Yes, I think the three words that's important, and this is also it's the theme of the B20 this year, which is innovation. We are putting innovation party, and also inclusion, which is we're talking about not just MSME but also women. And the third most important is collaboration, and this is why we are all here today. And we each have to ask, how can we be part of this collaboration? Because definitely nobody can do it alone. AVPN cannot do it alone. We in the B20 can't do it alone. We need all of you to be part of this. And I think when we call for action, it's not just about putting the money where there, but also about being there, your participation in connecting this whole thing. And I think when I talked to my own government and I said, you know, you want us to do this, to do that, how about you? What are you putting in, right? So this is all call to action, not just to us, but to everybody, including our government, including all the civil society. I mean, let's do something. Let's make it work, something that we can say and look at all this inspiring story that it can actually be executed and make it happen. A lot of this inspiring story are just narrative and stories. The only way to do it is to make it happen is when we collaborate and we push this and mobilize all this so that we can actually sit there and say, wow, we make it happen. So let's make it happen.
Absolutely. Let's make it happen. Closing the gender equality gap is not just a fundamental right, but it is the only way to progress. So as Shinta and Alex both said, let's make it happen. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and we will end the panel now. Big hand for my panelists.
Thank you, Naina, Shinta, and Alex. We're inspired by your personal and professional journeys and reinforcing Maya Angelou's statement that each time a woman stands up for herself, without knowing it, she stands up for all women. So thank you for standing up for Asian women, especially so through this collaborative effort. Like our panel said, focusing on a really vital issue in a timely manner with an appetite for risk and innovation. So that's our takeaway for today. Transitioning now to the next critical thematic, climate change is perceived to be one of the greatest challenges we have faced as a species. We're going to spend the next few minutes on what solution opportunities there are, what shifts our expert panelists are witnessing in the realm of capital investments, and what the role of sustainable finance is and can be in accelerating SDGs and climate goals. I have the pleasure now of introducing and inviting on stage our moderator for this panel, Niall O'Connor, Asia Director, SEI. Our speakers include Sandeep Roy Chaudhary, Director and Co-founder, VNB Advisory. Komal Sahu, Chief of Sustainable Finance, AVPN. Yes, louder applause. I know it's the last session. And our last speaker, William McFarland, Global Technical Expert in Climate and Business, SNB, Netherlands Development Organization for Asia region. Over to you, Niall.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, nearly. Thank you for those who have stayed. For those of you who are leaving, sorry to see you go. It's going to be an entertaining session this time around. So this time yesterday we had the head of TED Talks ask everybody at the back if they'd like to move forward so you can engage in the conversation. So if you're feeling kind of a little bit far away over there and you want to come up a little bit, please do so, or go to the left or go to the right. But now I see people moving, I know you're awake. That's a good thing. Okay, so today we wanted to just look at the impacts of sustainable financing for the impact industry that we're looking at. And one of the things that we at SEI, as the Stockholm Environment Institute, are heavily involved in is research to provide data and to provide evidence to make good decisions when moving forward. We were just at the introduction there talking about the impact of climate change and how that's impacting most of the countries around us. You see a lot of vulnerable people just don't have access to the finance to try and build resilience. How are we going to try and change that? How do we change the infrastructure to get finance to the most vulnerable people? So within SEI, over the last month, we've just launched what we're calling the Centre for Financing Sustainability. The idea is to try and undertake research with partners, with the stakeholders on the ground, communities, with the investors, with banks and with government, to see what sort of infrastructure is necessary, what sort of approach can we take that is led by the vulnerable community so they get access to what they need and can help them towards resilient lifestyles against climate change. So we want to try and talk with a great team of people here today to try and look at what their opinions are when it comes to how to advance this program around climate finance and how to ensure that it gets to the most vulnerable and most needy. So we're going to try and quickly go into the first set of questions and try and understand this from the different perspectives. And we have Kamal here from, I think we all know AVPN at this stage, but Kamal is here and obviously represents the platform that helps to catalyze investments in the social sector. So how does AVPN, how have you adjusted to and how do you lead change in helping the investors navigate this social and environment impact sector?
So thank you, Niall. And happy to be here to give the AVPN perspective. AVPN's mission is to move capital towards impact. We as an organization see ourselves as ecosystem builders, and we have a three-pronged approach with it. We connect people, we help them learn, not just from us with the research that we do, but also from each other. And then we take them to opportunities where they can actually take action. It's not just social. I mean, a lot of people say that we're looking at social investment. We also are very concerned about environmental investments as well, because there's an intersection between the two, and it's increasingly becoming more urgent to make sure that the two are interconnected and investments in one don't preclude the investments in another. We have, a lot of my work involves family offices. And what we have done is they form I would say, the supply side of capital. And then we obviously need to introduce them to the demand, those that are demanding that capital that should be deployed in these opportunities. So we lead them through a journey. We run a couple of impact investing fellowships. Many of our members have joined that. In fact, we did one in conjunction with Africa as well. Foundations such as Oppenheimer Generations, Rockefeller, as well as Ford Foundation supported us in these fellowships to make sure that we could educate our community about impact investing opportunities. We then take it through to action. So we basically have a deal share platform that has direct opportunities that they can invest in, which are about 400 such opportunities, which also have climate smart solutions on there. And then we also have impact funds. People think of AVPN being very philanthropy and very focus on areas that don't include that entire continuum of capital. I'd like to say we have 70 members in the space that are impact funds and incubators, accelerators, that I would say conservatively manage about $20 billion, have $20 billion in assets under management. So it's not a small number. And again, we're across that entire continuum of capital. If philanthropy is what you are interested in, we can give you access to opportunities there. If impact investing is what you're interested in, we have impact fund members we can introduce you to. And if it's sustainability-focused corporates, many of our families invest in public markets. In fact, a large portion of their investments is in public markets. We've been running sustainability dialogues, so I guess surface up thought leadership and first movers. So we believe that our role as ecosystem builders is to facilitate that learning and then take them to action. We've been hearing from a number of people throughout the course of the last 2 days that our power as a network is to do just that.
Okay. Thank you for that. And maybe I'll move on to William and I'll talk about, or ask you about really, some of the risks that businesses and investors face in this process, particularly with the effects of climate change. So what steps do you think that businesses, the investors, should be undertaking in order to mitigate the climate change risks that they face?
Thanks, Niall. I think my background and expertise is in land use and agriculture, so I'm going to speak about that really. I mean, certainly there's kind of lots of ways to think about investing in climate change mitigation or adaptation. Other key subsectors would include water sanitation, coastal resilience, disaster preparedness. Those are big ones too. But if I kind of come back to agriculture, especially in the Asian context, a key cost and a risk is the nature of production here and smallholder farmers. And I've heard a lot the last few days about the complexity of designing programs and the kind of added cost of getting a product. Maybe this is a new climate resilient seed variety or a new kind of water saving irrigation technology or something. The cost of getting that to market is so much higher when you're dealing with small value, relatively small value goods because they need to be accessible to relatively poor, vulnerable communities. And often these people are the furthest away from the economic centres, the furthest away from where you're producing it. So that's the kind of key kind of risk, a key kind of cost we see. A key risk is that these people are often, you don't have a easily accessible database on their credit history. How do you invest in them? Even the intermediaries might be informal, cash-only businesses. Personally, I believe that kind of technology is kind of, lots of great work on innovation and piloting has been done, but the kind of, banks or investors or the kind of the financial service providers that provide the last mile financing to small businesses or to households might be, incredibly unfamiliar. They're not represented here, they're not having these discussions, they're not reading the scientific papers that SEI might be producing or something. So there's a lot of lack of familiarity. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. And then moving swiftly on to Sandeep, as we see across the region, climate change is having massive impacts for everybody. We're seeing massive kind of achieving in a lot of the SDGs, and some of them are going backwards, not going forwards. There's a lot of problems obviously coming out of the pandemic that's causing issues for many people, particularly the most vulnerable in society. And I'm trying to think through, we heard statistics today of over 120 million plus going back into poverty as a result of the current crises that we have. So how do we bring about, mobilizing businesses, the investment sectors, to try and turn this trajectory around? How do we support the vulnerable communities?
Yeah, thanks, Niall. Firstly, I think one of the semantics part, and this is something in VNV, we talk about the climate vulnerable communities actually as first responders rather than the vulnerable community, because they are really at the forefront of something they've not created. And a coastal community gets hit by a cyclone first, not us in the mainland, and that's something that we always categorize them as first responders rather than the vulnerable, because I think there is an equation, financial equation kind of a thing that works there. But having said that, you're right. I think we've moved backwards on the SDGs. And if I have to look at the climate lens and what is happening right now, I mean, I come from India. We're experiencing a heat wave like never before, which actually affects this a lot more. Compound that with COVID and what happened over the last 2 years, we're really, really looking at a very, very dire situation. And the only way to do this is to deploy capital at scale. I know it's being spoken about a lot on how you deploy capital at scale, but I think the business case needs to change now. I know we speak about patient capital. I think it's more about realistic capital and because things are going to happen, and I think the risk profiles have changed drastically and are going to change given that climate change is a reality. And that variability is something that investors need to understand and deploy capital at scale. The returns, because we talk to a lot of investors, and we invest ourselves, in fact, and we come across this saying that, guys, we're really happy to get into this, but what happens and how are the risk parameters looking at? So the traditional business case isn't going to work anymore, especially on sustainable finance. We need to rethink about what we think of how we calculate our returns. It's not, we understand that it's no longer an IRR-based, it's an SROI-based investment, that's fair, but I think we need to really rethink on how we can get that. And another part, and this is not just, he mentioned farmers, I think this is a very important part, especially us being in Asia. We really need to look at that. And I think one of the things that we've been working on is not just farming, but every technology, micro SME, et cetera, funding them in silos is a problem. We believe that because I worked with an SME fund, a climate SME fund, so to speak, and the SME fund basically just encompassed every SME, but SMEs also have industries, and you can group them into different buckets. And I'm a firm believer in aggregating this and then investing in that, because that makes a ticket size that's worthwhile for a business to get into. And that's something that's quite important to get that capital at scale, be it farm storage technologies, be it something else, be it just energy efficiency at the micro SME level. I am a big believer in aggregation, and I think that's going to be one way to unlock that capital and possibly move the needle back to the positive side of the SDGs, really.
Okay, thanks for that. I see you're chomping at the bit to go there again.
Thanks. Yeah, there's some great taxonomies if you want to kind of get involved. Lightsmith Group's got a good one about kind of types of business working in climate adaptation. There's a good kind of agri-related one developed by Safin, ISF Advisors, on SMEs in the kind of agri-land use space, and they can really, it's the segment of what we're talking about when we talk about kind of climate adaptation or something. I just wanted to add on this kind of unlocking capital on the enabling environment, and we see with quite a few impact sectors that the kind of public policy environment isn't that great, and that let's look at edutech in China in the last 18 months or something. They've just had hundreds of billions wiped off those valuations with a change in policy. And Tana from GoTo Group said yesterday it's so important for the private sector to have to know what the goalposts are, and if the goalposts are set, the private sector can work towards it, and having a kind of clear vision on a particular impact space, in this case climate change, is also really critical. So getting the public sector policy to kind of liberalize where needed, or open up and allow the finance to flow and the private sector to do its work, and can be really powerful. And in some of the key impact sectors, often in climate, things related to land, that's not always the case.
Okay. Yeah,
I was going to add a couple of points to what Sandeep and Will have said as well. I mean, we have a number of impact funds that are in the space of agriculture. We have, for example, Ankur Capital that has quite a large portfolio that's made up of agriculture, agri-tech as well. But the impact thesis is both social as well as an environmental one. Poverty alleviation, suitable employment, making sure that there's technology aspect to it, and that it can scale. But in addition, then you're looking at sort of greenhouse gases, you're looking at food security. So they're addressing some of these climate-related issues at the same time, and they're compelling. They're compelling investment opportunities. The fund itself is a compelling investment opportunity. Similarly, we have Avishkar that is invested in another agriculture entity. So that when Sandeep was mentioning about deploying capital at scale, it's funds like these that are able and in a position that can go out and make these portfolio investments, which are of substantial quantum and have an impact on climate change.
No, I think that's really important, and we need to see how we can continue to to gather vulnerable communities into these kind of groupings so that we can access funding at scale to support them. But maybe I'll just come back to a point where you mentioned first responders, which I think is a very interesting point, but it kind of makes me think that they're already in an emergency if you're a first responder. And we have to realize how difficult the situation is for people kind of on the ground in some cases. In discussions yesterday, they were talking, let's not call them vulnerable communities, but resilient communities. But the reality is that there is a lot of vulnerability there with the current impacts of climate. So one of the key reasons why SEI started looking at this Centre for Financing Sustainability is to focus on kind of more inclusive approaches to accessing finance. And it just kind of sometimes strikes me that it's very complicated to access finance. It's very challenging for somebody at a community level to come and find a project that they can invest in. So what advice maybe would you have to enable vulnerable communities, indigenous people, get more access to this? Is there just something off the top of your head that would help?
On Monday, we held a G20 Impact Day. Indonesia wanted to make sure that scaling up blended finance and making sure that there was access and inclusion was very much a part of the agenda. People like yourselves, SEI, contributed to a paper on how we can facilitate access and inclusion to such blended finance opportunities. So the key sort of barriers we had was that, you know, the understanding is that there's a lack of awareness and there's a lack of understanding of these products. So how do we make sure that we have training programs at government, at local levels, perhaps with some intermediaries and NGOs involved, and the government's also speaking the same language so that there can be access to, and you know, perhaps at the local level there could be some funds that just do just that. They act as enablers. You need that enabling environment to be there which is in local languages. It shouldn't just be, you know, it shouldn't be just English, because in many cases that makes it difficult.
I think my kind of quick one response would be get the money to where your kind of target beneficiaries, get it to where they normally go, and you know, don't kind of maybe create new structures. So in the case of farmers, that might be microfinance institutions. In the case of enterprises, depending on what size and scale they are, I think it's really important to get it to their go-to places. It's like putting, you know, there's no point putting a job advert in the wrong place if the person you don't want to see the job isn't reading that magazine or going on that website. You need to get it right there. That's difficult. I live and do a lot of my work in Vietnam. There's 66 provinces, or 63, I forget the exact number. It's quite decentralized. The microfinance institutions there will typically have 63 different directors, and in each one there's 10 provinces, and there's a lot of autonomy. So what's that? At least 600 people that might need to be trained and understand. Let's say there's a financing facility. I'd love to create one that they can access on and draw down kind of concessional finance for farmers because it's going to have a nice climate impact. Like, it takes a lot of effort to get that money down there, but I think to have the impact and to get to the vulnerable groups, you can't expect them to get online and find out about blended finance. They just need to know that the person they normally get finance from, or the person their neighbor gets finance from, has got a new product and it suits them.
I think now more than finance, it's a couple of things, especially again going back to land use, because that's one of the major issues here. I think land rights has a big role to play in how finance can flow. That's a challenge it's a real world challenge for us. Landless farming is a thing in Asia. Not every owner of the land is the one who's farming the land. And this is especially true of the women of the household. We run a program called Women Are Farmers too. In fact, they spend more time in the field than the men of the household, because the men of the household are doing something else. But then they don't have land title, so getting that finance down to them is challenging. I think there needs to be policy reform on that end, because that's a real problem that we have on how to channel finance down. Next thing that needs to work is that first, financial inclusion of landless laborers on the farmland. Number two is creditworthiness. Now, how do you increase creditworthiness? We've seen that federations, collectives work, and loaning to a collective is safer than loaning to individuals, and that's how collective finance could work, and that's one way to channelize finance there. Number 3 is climate finance for FIs, DFIs, and MFIs. Basis data from the ground, that is again something that when I say change the business case, we need to change that business case. There needs to be access for capital to the capital provider as well, and that is where climate finance could come in, and the traditional finance maybe is something. So basically inclusivity on the gender side, on the landless side is really, really important. First the financial inclusion, and then get the money down to this thing. And number 3 is the value addition part. Value addition meaning we have seen that direct transfers or direct money for seeds, etc., as an adaptation financing program doesn't necessarily work. Create the linkage first, create crop storage, create the linkage, everything else is going to fall into place. So invest in the value chain rather than the farmer or the vulnerable community themselves. You need to give them a means to actually have that produce being sold, and then everything else will flow from there. So that is how I would see this really channeling down to the vulnerable, so to speak. Yeah.
Thank you. A lot to learn for us all to integrate that into our programs moving forward. But Kamal, I just wanted to come back to you. In terms of AVPN, you develop a lot of partnerships on the ground here, working with stakeholders from, I suppose, private sector, civil society, etc. What type of trends have you witnessed in terms of blended finance for approaches for the SDGs themselves, or indeed for climate action?
So I think blended finance in the climate space, I would say, is still early days. We know Convergence, a member of ours, launched one for a fund for Asia, looking at natural capital, and they were looking at possibly giving some first loss guarantees and also a design window for that. But again, it's, as I said, it's early days, but we are seeing with G20 adopting the blended finance and putting that on the agenda, I think we're going to see a lot more of this. But the other thing we're starting to see is, and I was having a conversation earlier today with Village Capital, and they were saying, well, we are trying to launch an impact bond. We have people on the risk funder space. We need somebody on the outcome side. We need somebody on the, to help us with defray some of the structuring costs. So we have them at small levels, and we have them at the very large public-private partnership levels, but we need that philanthropic capital that, in some cases, foundations and family offices are the only ones that can provide to help us structure these products, help us get them to scale, such that we can then use private capital even for commercial, for the commercial leg of it as well.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on, because I know that, Will, you wanted to add some points on this comment as well. Are you still happy to input?
I could add on all the points. And, I think big trends I've seen, and I've thought of this before I met Sandeep, carbon, especially in the land and nature and agri-space, has really kind of been a real acceleration of interest. And I think whether a project or a goal can be 100% funded or not by carbon, I think in many cases the kind of prices and the level of interest we're seeing really creates opportunity, through blended finance structures. And I just came from a great kind of group earlier discussing these. I think it creates the opportunity where, costs can now be overcome that perhaps couldn't be overcome previously. So I think that's a great trend. I think digital technology, again, in the 6 years since I've been living in Vietnam, the kind of adoption rates of things like apps for finance apps, banking apps, as well as the kind of rapid rise, not always kind of great business cases or commercially viable, but the rapid rise of apps for farmers. You can now scan a rice crop and it will tell you what the disease is or how healthy it is, or even when to expect the harvest. So these kind of creating great opportunities. I think at a meta level, I think the big trend in the last kind of couple of years is realizing that adaptation has been left behind, and I want to see a lot more catalytic capital and interest and investment from donors and governments and philanthropists in getting the adaptation side of things really moving. Someone earlier today said, we really don't need catalytic capital on the mitigation side anymore. Renewable energy's kind of off on its own. So, there's a good recognition of that, and I think it needs a kind of injection of innovation, both in terms of technology, but also partnerships and blended finance structures, like Kamal was just saying.
Yeah. Just a quick I think you're right. I mean, carbon is one blended finance instrument, but you can do so many. I think at the private sector level, I think if you have an enabling framework, capital moves. I mean, we have a case study of maize farming project where there is a bond being issued for the MFI, who's getting capital at a lower rate of interest, who's then lending to an FPO at a lower rate of interest, and carbon markets basically is, again, paying 50% of that loan, 50% of the loan, 50% of the revenue is going towards a processing center, which is why the farmer is getting a premium on the product. So that's a blended cycle right there, and these are case studies that are happening. Different funds are moving in. We are creating a fund of our own. I think blended finance works quite well. I think philanthropic funding does not need to fund the entire program in itself. There are lots of instruments right now that can come in. In fact, if just maybe on the farm practices, I think crop insurance is a clear business case. And I think that's the highest form of adaptation that you could provide a farmer, because our farmers that we work with love that product. Now the thing is, how do I de-risk that for the insurer and make the premium levels something that is realistic? Philanthropy can come in and de-risk part of that. And then the farmers are willing to pay the premiums, or we can pay them the premiums as an incentive on a climate outcome. So these are the things that can be blended in. It just needs some innovative thinking. Sit down and do that, because I think if we get stuck on 100% financing of programs via one instrument, it's never going to work. And that's something we need to mix instruments together. And there are live case studies of this. We just need to put our heads down and get to it. Really.
Thank you for that. And it just sparked a thought in my head when you talk about innovative ideas. But one of the challenges we also see a lot of is a lot of the funds are going out there, they're requesting innovative and creative solutions. We have this kind of urgency coming upon us. Climate is hitting people fast and furiously. What's your thought on why are we always looking for the most innovative and creative as opposed to let's get a job done and support immediately? What are your thoughts on that? Open it to all of you.
I was just going to say, innovation and creativity have its role to play, and of course, innovation and creativity can also lead to scale in many cases, especially where technology is involved. But there is a clear need, and the need is now, and it's here, and it needs to be addressed, in which case the capital needs to be mobilized. I mean, we had earlier today Google talk about a 3 million pooled fund that they're launching with AVPN to address and to give funding to climate-focused startups. We need that kind of catalytic capital. We need those kind of pool funds to come into existence that can move quickly and can give unrestricted grants. We've been hearing a lot of that. And that's necessary to catalyze the space, to get the money to where it needs to go?
That's a great question. I think it's important to think about the different types of investment that are needed in this space, and there is some things that require innovation. Let's say climate resilient seed varieties, and there's a cost to doing that. And I think maybe the people at this conference can really understand that. It's more like kind of venture capital, R&D, going to grow, quite scalable. We can kind of roughly conceive what the kind of the finances of that institution or piece of intellectual property might look like. The other side is the costs of adopting this stuff, and that might be the cost of a multinational company, I don't know, reorganizing its supply chains, or the cost for a farmer of buying slightly more expensive seed because we've said, I promise you that it's going to be more resilient to the droughts that come. And they require different types of funding. And the kind of first example is more like venture capital or venture philanthropy. The second might be multinationals doing green bonds, or what does that look like for smallholder farmers? Actually, they need slightly bigger, then their working capital loan next year needs to be slightly bigger. So I think it's really just important to clarify it, and nicely asked question. And then secondly, we can start to think, okay, in this community, supply chain, country, climate risk, what is the barrier? Do we need innovation, or do we just need to find a way to help people meet the cost of adaptation? And then we can think about, okay, what's the financing gap and how to meet it?
Thank you.
Yeah, I actually couldn't agree more. I think innovation is needed, but business will invest in innovation. I think the rest of us need to scale up pilots. And that's what we should be doing, because sometimes I see that we're a little bit cagey about pilots as funders, as all of us. Our pilots are our pilots, and I think there's a lack of knowledge sharing. I see a same pilot that was done by somebody else in 2012 being done again by someone else in another country in 2019. What's the point of it? Let private sector do the innovation part. Let us all scale that 2012 pilot. We have lost 7 years doing the same damn pilot again and again. So for us, I think we need to take it twofold. There is innovation, but business is already investing in innovation because there's a clear business case out of it. I think we should be putting our head down, putting financial innovation in place, and data innovation in place to scale up something that we already know. And there's enough out there. And this is a reality. I mean, I see that happening again and again. And pilots launched with a lot of fanfare in conferences saying, we did this pilot. I'm like, somebody else did this about 5 years back. So that's something we need to be really, and that's where AVPN networks kind of help. Saying, guys, this is something that it's important, it's an emergency. Let's share what we know first, and then come together and see how to make it work, really. So.
Fully agree. But of course, we need to keep innovating and making sure we're coming up with the next level of ideas. But it's great to keep really hitting the key issues that we have to address and supporting the most vulnerable. But maybe I'll go back to Will and just talk about your work with SMV as well. You do a lot of work to support the SDGs, of course. But what challenges do the likes of SMV or other development institutions have in trying to mobilize more capital towards sustainable development?
I think what's been mentioned already about getting money down to the kind of the first responders, or the kind of the missing gap is the poorest farmers with the fewest assets and the earliest stage companies also with the fewest assets. Getting down to them, I think, is kind of such a big challenge. And even just kind of regular finance, or even building a structure that can get large-scale climate finance, multilateral funds, GCF also really struggling even just to get money to low-income countries, not middle-income countries. So getting money down is the big challenge. And then I think I guess the kind of flip side of that is the solutions. And what are these connections? Someone earlier in the week, Craig, his name is, got to credit him, mentioned thinking about it like tech, where software has API connections to allow two pieces of technology to talk to each other. How can pilots that one organization has done be shared openly with others? How can different types of finance, philanthropy and donor on one side, how can their programs be better aligned with the interests of impact investors or even commercial investors? So those are the challenges, and I guess the solutions are finding a way to make those API connections so that pilots can be scaled faster, so that different types of finance can be aligned faster, and so structures can be made, different people can take their impact or their risk and get the returns they need quicker.
If I could just make a quick point, sorry, Kumar. There's one thing that's a challenge. What is the difference between climate finance and normal traditional finance? For me, it's the data. Climate finance is basis on outcome. If we have no way to measure the outcome, then let's not call it climate finance. It's just normal finance then. So the thing is, I think the big innovation that we need right now is not so much the technology of it, it's about how we are measuring the impact of it. And those are the metrics basis which you deploy climate finance. And that's where I think, I talked about aggregation at the beginning. I think at a micro SME level, farmland level, whatever it is, we need aggregation, ticket sizes, and good data systems, and not just management, the data management systems with good data MRV systems. That's where we actually need a lot of innovation, because we need to make it cheaper. Today, it is great for a 100-hectare plot, but it's not good for a 100,000-hectare project. So we need to really put our heads down on how to get data, because more data that we get, it actually subsidizes the finance significantly, and that's where the business case starts to change. And because it's an outcome-based financing, if there's no way to really measure their outcome, there's no point talking about climate finance, really, to be honest. So that's where I think we need to really come in, and that's how we need unlocking capital at scale. We keep talking about it. Data will play a massive part in it, in my opinion. Just
super quickly, on that, an issue is exactly related to that is adaptation. And carbon has this nice metric. So someone asked this on a table next to me in the last session, and there wasn't an answer. How how you measure and describe the impact you're having around adaptation is tricky. Even in my opinion, things like gender could be easier. Women on boards, women CEOs, number of women participating in a program. Defining climate adaptation is super difficult, and therefore it makes it hard to really communicate the impact, to understand the effectiveness, and that makes that data that Sandeep has just talked about really, really tricky to put together.
That's where SEI comes in, right? Hopefully.
I was going to do that little pitch myself later, but yes. Kamal, did you want to say something there?
Yeah, I was going to say, Sandeep has mentioned real capital. I mean, we need to mobilize institutional investors. That's where the trillions of dollars that are needed, you know, we're already talking about 4.5 trillion annually needed to address the SDGs. That's where the real capital sits. How do we get that? Well, we need to have, I mean, they look at us in this continuum space of proof of concept. We need to prove that what we're doing is having the impact that it needs to, and that social and environmental are not in conflict with each other. You can achieve both. And in this part of the world, the recognition needs to be that, you know, we're not cocooned. Climate change is an issue for all of us. You know, from 2010 to 2017, we have had losses of about $150 billion just because of climate-related urgencies, emergencies that have happened, catastrophes. So again, we need to make sure, and some of it is happening. Some of it's organically happening with the net zero commitments that we're making, countries are making. Indonesia's made one for 2060. Many have stepped up to earlier 2030. But the urgency is now, the SDG commitments for 2030, and that's what we need to achieve.
Absolutely, and it's a tight timeline to do that. But maybe going back to Sandeep, that you allow me to talk about SEI and a science-based approach. But I think it is important that we collect the right data. We have the disaggregated data. We have, you know, great examples of case studies that can be independently validated for the work that they can do, to be able to share this widely, to enable others to follow this, rather than, again, trying to innovate something new. So very much support trying to bring evidence-based science to the decision-making table as well, to support that. I'm going to just maybe take a step back again and ask a question from your experiences working on the ground, from your experiences working with investors as well. We hear so much about the different types of climate financing that's out there. We have blue financing, green financing, blended financing, sustainable financing, etc., etc. Each of them with their own criteria, their own taxonomies. How do we go about simplifying it, you know, without losing or enhancing risk? But how do we go about simplifying it, making it less bureaucratic in many cases, so that, you know, people can gain access to it?
Yeah, I mean, we need to make it less bureaucratic for sure, I think. And that's not just, I think the bureaucracy started with public finance. To be honest, public finance, I mean, we talk about a lot of climate finance flowing between countries, but look at where it heads in finally. Hardly anything really trickles down to people who actually need it. And I think that's a lesson to be learned by the private sector as well on reducing bureaucracy, as well as grant makers and bilaterals, because some of it is tied in with so many loops and loops. For a normal indigenous community living somewhere, to access that is next to impossible. And then you'll end up going to a larger organization such as ours or anybody else and saying, guys, can you give us access? It is bureaucracy needs to stop. We have no time left. And like I said, the business case needs to change. We cannot keep thinking on the same lines. Institutional investors you spoke about, I think institutional investors are also quite bureaucratic. And I think that mind shift has to happen given the emergency that we find ourselves in. And that's an education process that needs to happen right now, because we can't wait for the investors to wake up one day and saying, oh, I get it now. Because there is a point where we'll have to bang the door down and say, guys, this is really important that you get on board with this. And this is the kind of business case that you have. It's very different from what you've been doing so far. The asset risks are different. The asset itself is different. The asset class is different. So how do you change that mind shift and that is when we will reduce bureaucracy. Because the moment we talk institutional, and Komal's right, till the time we haven't unlocked the institutional investors, we're talking about peanuts till then. That's where I think this will really change.
Okay. Anybody else want to chip in on that? So you were initially going to jump, but you don't have to, no pressure. No problem. I'm just conscious of time now, and I want to make sure we have a little bit of time for you to maybe sum up with key ideas. So just think them in your head. But as we're waiting for that last kind of minute, you know, where do you see the role of governments and the financial regulators in this, in trying to attract more funding to the climate financing or into financing in general? What is their role now as gatekeepers of the funding?
I'll go. Two things I said at the beginning. I think one is around setting vision and goalposts, and of course, like strict targets and a vision around both kind of national commitment to climate change, but also, you know, even kind of planning and sector-specific visions. You know, climate-smart commodities here, or you know, addressing climate vulnerabilities in this region. I think that's important. And then secondly, the enabling environment. I think generally, often you know, not stereotyping too badly to say that the people in senior positions in ministries of environment or ministries of forestry or ministries of land kind of not often the most, I don't know, not so dynamic. You know, they've got their own specialties and they've got their own careers in those topics, and they don't understand the types of kind of finance that Sandeep just mentioned, and you now, like, kind of, they don't understand those differences too. So they need to kind of be brought into these conversations and then understand how, you know, I'm not saying kind of, doesn't have to be mass liberalization, but kind of maybe small tweaks to the enabling environment here and there can allow things to happen that aren't currently happening.
Thank you for that. Kamal?
I'm more optimistic. We saw COP26, we saw the urgency being brought to the forefront. It became everybody's television, the news came to everybody, and the urgency was highlighted by the IPCC reports as well. We saw GFANZ being launched. You know, it's a financial alliance, but it's not just for the financial services sector. They're obviously getting to the real businesses as well. So I think that there is a mobilization happening. Multiple stock exchanges are stepping up to it. They're asking for reporting to be done. I think as you strategically start as an organization, as a corporate, to start to think about climate, you start to think about your supply chains, I think that will definitely catalyze what is going to happen with respect to climate. And, you know, we all know there is no planet B. No. This is all we've got, right? We have to make this happen, and we have to make it happen not just for myself, but for my children and my grandchildren and the generations hence. And if we don't think with that mindset, you know, we won't be there. We as a species won't be there.
That's kind of a startling remark, but yes, we as a species won't be there. So we have a lot on our plates to try and change and support over the next kind of couple of years. So just with the few minutes that we have left, if you had kind of two key points to make to help drive the accessibility and the inclusiveness of climate finance or sustainable finance, what would those two key points be? Bearing in mind you have 1 minute.
For me, I mean, and this is something I started with, for me, and this is getting to the brass tacks of actual financing, aggregation and data. For me, these are the big two. Aggregation is important because whatever said and said, even if we change the mindset on the business case, we need a decent enough transaction size to make sense out of it. So aggregation, and again, because a lot of solutions are common between a lot of, you will have common threads in climate finance. So for me, aggregation and data, because data is basis which the money is going to flow, and result-based finance is just that. You need the results first, or, you know, you can structure around that, but that's something that, for me, these are the two big themes. And I will add a third one, which is basically something you alluded to, is the bureaucracy. I really, really think we just have to get our heads in with senior managements of companies, of investors, funders, bankers, the whole works, and governments. So I'll...
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Clear.
Sandeep did three, so I'll just do one. I think mine is go small, and I think if you're an investor or you're managing money on behalf of an investor, and I use that term really widely, if you're expecting anything less than market rate returns, anything remotely concessional, whether it's a pure grant or a donation or, you know, something in between, go smaller. I think use the subsidy or the concessionality that you're providing to go smaller. There is plenty, and I mean in kind of ticket size. Like there is plenty of good impact investors and like impact-minded commercial investors looking at kind of big ticket sizes, $5, $10 million. There's this huge missing middle between kind of small micro enterprises and all that stuff in between. And there's such a big, especially in Southeast Asia, very disaggregated, small communities. Someone said there was like 40 million SMEs in Indonesia alone. So there's hundreds of millions in Southeast Asia and South Asia. Like, use your money and the impact you're going to get to go smaller.
Kamal?
We barely touched on MSMEs. They're the engine, the backbone of any developing economy. We, as an organization, feel the need to make sure we support MSMEs, not just MSMEs, but gender diverse MSMEs as well, that have been disproportionately impacted. So I would say we just launched, with the support of Visa Foundation and MSME Task Force, we're going through design thinking on that, and we would love to be informed by our members on this. So I think networks like ours have a major role to play to bring this together for people to hear, to learn from each other, connect, learn, and then take action.
Thank you very much for that. I've got a flashing light there saying time's up, just on time. But I'd like to just say a warm thanks to each of the panel members for joining us here today. They have kept you a little bit late for your evening drink, so we'll try and close up shop now and say thank you very much indeed, and you may leave the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Niall.
Thank you, Neil, Sandeep, Komal, and William for sharing your views on the challenges and opportunities. Those views were candid and useful indeed. Well, we're at the halfway mark, and you've already had the opportunity of accessing 36 sessions across various subjects of climate action, gender equity, sustainable finance, blended finance, education, livelihoods, and navigating all the intersectionalities between them. And of course, we hope you have enjoyed all the huddles and exchanges on the sidelines as well. We can now move these conversations over to cocktails. We will see you at the Nusantara foyer, and now you know your way on level 2. Thank you for being an energetic, engaged, and wonderful audience. Rest, recoup, and come back here tomorrow with the same high energy at 8:45 a.m. Because like Chris Anderson spoke of generosity, positive vibes are infectious too. But we'd like to end the day today acknowledging respected Mr. Bhupesh Baghel, Chief Minister of Chhattisgarh, India, who himself is a key proponent of climate action in the country. He was really keen to make it to our conference, but unfortunately could not be here due to unavoidable exigencies. He has graciously shared a video message for all of you. With that, signing off, thank you and good night.
नमस्कार देवियों और सज्जनों, आज मुझे आपसे बात करने का अवसर देने के लिए धन्यवाद। दुर्भाग्य से किन्हीं परिस्थितियों के कारण मैं व्यक्तिगत रूप से उपस्थित होने में असमर्थ था, लेकिन मुझे उम्मीद है मेरे इंडोनेशियाई सहयोगी और मैं जल्दी ही मिलेंगे। गर्मजोशी से आमंत्रित करने के लिए इंडोनेशियाई सरकार और AVPN को धन्यवाद। यह सम्मेलन एक अभूतपूर्व मंच है जो सामाजिक प्रतिबद्धता वाले ऐसे लोगों को एक साथ लाता है जो दुनिया को एक बेहतर जगह बनाने के लिए काम कर रहे हैं, और मैं इसका हिस्सा बनकर सम्मानित महसूस कर रहा हूं। मैं आपसे यह साझा करना चाहता था कि मैं इस G20 AVPN कार्यक्रम में भाग लेने के लिए क्यों उत्साहित था। आप जानते हैं कि पिछले कुछ वर्षों में छत्तीसगढ़ के मुख्यमंत्री के रूप में मुझे राज्य को आर्थिक, सामाजिक और सांस्कृतिक रूप से समृद्ध बनाने के लिए अपने भाइयों और बहनों के साथ मिलकर काम करने का सौभाग्य मिला है। चाहे वह हमारी समृद्ध विरासत का जश्न मनाने के लिए एक अंतर्राष्ट्रीय आदिवासी नृत्य उत्सव आयोजित करना रहा हो, या सुनिश्चित करना रहा हो कि हमारे पास हरित उर्वरकों की प्रचुर उपलब्धता हो ताकि हमारे किसान फल फूल सके, या राज्य भर में महिला SHG को मजबूत करना जो दोनों लिंगों के लिए समान विकास पर ध्यान केंद्रित करता है। मैं यह सुनिश्चित करना चाहता हूं कि मेरे छत्तीसगढ़ राज्य वैश्विक स्तर पर विकसित और विकसित हो, कि मेरे छत्तीसगढ़ राज्य वैश्विक स्तर पर विकसित और विकसित हो। मैं एक किसान का बेटा हूं और खेतों में पला बढ़ा हूं, और लोग क्या कर रहे हैं इस पर ध्यान देने के अलावा मैं यह बेहतर तरीके से जानता हूं कि धरती माता पर ध्यान देना भी उतना ही महत्वपूर्ण है। मेरी परवरिश ने मुझे सिखाया है, यह हमारी जिम्मेदारी है कि हम अपनी धरती की उतनी ही देखभाल करें जितना वो हमारी करती है। दुर्भाग्य से धरती माता ने जितनी देखभाल हमारी की, उतनी देखभाल हम धरती माता की नहीं कर पाए, और इसका प्रभाव जलवायु परिवर्तन के साथ दिखने लगा है। हमारे किसान गंभीर सूखे, पानी की कमी, प्रदूषण के बढ़ते स्तर और बहुत कुछ का सामना कर रहे हैं। यह सुनिश्चित करने के लिए हम आगे बढ़ते रहें और समृद्ध हों, इन महत्वपूर्ण मुद्दों का समाधान खोजने के लिए एक साथ आने का समय आ गया है। छत्तीसगढ़ में हमने जैविक खेती को बढ़ावा देकर, अपने वन क्षेत्र को बढ़ाकर और अपने पूर्वजों के संरक्षण संस्कृति को विकसित करके ऐसा करने का प्रयास किया है। लेकिन हमें इन सभी को विज्ञान और संसाधनों के साथ जोड़ना होगा ताकि आवश्यक रूपांतकारी बदलाव लाया जा सके। उदाहरण के लिए, हम पहले ही बायोगैस के उत्पादन के लिए जैविक कचरे का उपयोग कर रहे हैं, लेकिन अब हम पूरे राज्य में बिजली उत्पादन के लिए उसी मॉडल का उपयोग करने के इच्छुक हैं। इसी तरह जनजातीय समुदायों के लिए तेजी से अधिक पेड़ लगाने और उन्हें बनाए रखने का महत्व बताने के लिए एक प्रोत्साहन प्रणाली बनाने की इच्छुक हैं, और हम पूरे दक्षिण एशिया में सभी हरित व्यवसायों का केंद्र बनने की सोच रहे हैं। हमें अपेक्षित परामर्श और समर्थन की आवश्यकता है। ये कुछ विचार हैं जो हमारे पास हैं, और इनके लिए हम सक्रिय रूप से भागीदारों और सहयोगियों की तलाश कर रहे हैं। छत्तीसगढ़ी लोग स्नेही, दयालु और सरल लोग हैं, और इस साझा लक्ष्य के लिए आपको हमारे राज्य में पाकर हम सम्मानित महसूस करेंगे। मैं एक साथ काम करने की अपनी इच्छा को और पुख्ता तरीके से आपके सामने रखने के लिए यहाँ उपस्थित होना चाहता था, लेकिन सौभाग्य से हमारा प्रतिनिधित्व करने वाले हमारे सहयोगी वहाँ मौजूद हैं, जिनकी उपस्थिति हमारे एक साथ काम करने की इच्छा का प्रमाण है। मुझे उम्मीद है कि इस संदेश के माध्यम से मैं एक साथ काम करने के अपने इरादे को संप्रेषित करने में सक्षम रहा। हालांकि मैं इस सत्र में चूक गया हूं, परंतु मुझे आशा है मुझे रायपुर में आपका स्वागत करने का अवसर मिलेगा। मुझे अपना संदेश साझा करने की अनुमति देने के लिए फिर से धन्यवाद। एक अद्भुत सम्मेलन के लिए अनेक शुभेच्छाएं। धन्यवाद।